we're going to be looking at today is events. And this is kind of what makes programming different from making something in Illustrator or Photoshop or After Effects. In programming, we can make designs and animations and do lots of different types of things with graphics. But we can also record and detect user input. And so we can make things that are interactive, that our user can influence or change or interact with. So we can build our own software using those interactions. So any type of software that you use has interactive components, whether it's a game that you're using the keyboard to control the character, or a drawing application where you're using brushes and shapes and things like that. And all of those programs use what's called events. So that's what we're going to look at today, just a few basic events. So I'm going to call this sketch P5 events example. And so I'm making a multi-line comment here just to kind of review what we talked about on Tuesday. So I did a / and then an asterisk. And then I can write whatever I want here without it being read by the code compiler. And so I'll just put the date here. It's the 5th.
Do you make the index yourself, or did it do it for you automatically?
It makes the index and the style page automatically. So whenever you start a new sketch, if you look in the file system, it just builds the index and style sheet for you. So you can add stuff in here if you want to, and maybe we'll do that in a lesson. We'll add something to the HTML or the style page, but for the most part, you can just ignore these. And let me give this a name. I'll call this P5 events example. And I don't think I talked about this on Tuesday, but another thing that I can do is create collections. So if I want to create a collection for these examples, I can, let's see, how do I create a collection? I can go to Open, go to Collections. I'm going to create a new collection, call this MMP 100 Spring 2022. And then I can add sketches in here. So I can add in the example that I just created and then my robot example. So I have a little collection, and this has its own URL, so I can share that with people. And it also makes it a little bit easier to find stuff if you have a lot of sketches like I do. You guys probably don't have a lot of sketches at this point, but I have like lots of sketches going back to 2017 when this editor was first created for different classes and different projects and stuff like that. Okay, so we're looking at events today. If we go to the reference, so if I go to the editor and go to help and go to reference, there's a whole section in the P5 reference called events. And all of these events are P5 variables or functions that capture events that are just generally part of the browser. So everything we're doing runs in the browser, whether it's Chrome or Safari, and the browser will give you certain information like where the mouse is, what key is being pressed, all these different things that you need to create an application. If you're making a website and a user needs to enter their username and password, you have to be able to detect that that input is happening, or if they're clicking on stuff or interacting with your web page. And so we use events to detect what the user is doing. You can see the different types of events. We have acceleration. This is like the phone's orientation and gyroscope, and we're not going to be using that, at least not for now. I guess you could actually use that if you wanted to use your phone and make a drawing program with the phone rotation. But we're going to ignore that for now. We're going to use the keyboard today. And so there's a few different keyboard events we're going to look at. We're going to use the mouse. And so we won't use everything here, but these are some of the different events that we can do with the mouse. And then touch is also obviously for a phone with a touch screen. So we're not going to look at that, but you could use that as well. Yeah.
Are we working on our last project, or is this a new?
This is a new one.
A new one. Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to start by looking at the mouse. And the two basic properties of the mouse are the mouse X position and the mouse Y position. And so we're going to use those to basically track where the mouse is on our sketch. And so these two values are pretty simple. You can see here in this example sketch, this line is drawing at mouse X, so the two X points of the line are where the mouse is, and that's why the line follows the mouse. So we're going to start with that, and then we'll kind of add to it. I lost the events section. So here's my basic sketch. And on Tuesday, we added a bunch of different shapes. Today, I'm just going to add one shape to start. So I'm going to draw an ellipse, and I'll put it in the middle of the canvas, 200, 200, and I'll make it 20 pixels wide. And so I can hit Command Enter to run the sketch. And there's my little ellipse. Okay, not super exciting. Let's actually make it, let's do a fill and make it just one color. So it's a little bit simpler. Okay. So that's not super exciting. You know, we could open up Illustrator and create this pretty quickly. But what we can't do in Illustrator is we can actually move this ellipse around. So instead of drawing it 200 pixels X and 200 pixels Y, I'm going to draw this ellipse where the mouse is. And so then we'll see a little bit about how the program actually works. So this is pretty easy. I'm just going to replace the 200 for the X position with mouse X. And it's just mouse capital X. And I'm going to replace the 200 in the Y position with mouse capital Y. So I didn't really talk about the naming conventions on Tuesday. Let's talk about that for just a second. So when you're looking at the different words that JavaScript uses for different things, you'll probably notice a couple things. One is that they all start with lowercase letters. So the function starts with lowercase f. This function starts with lowercase f. Setup, what?
I can move now the little ellipse. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I haven't run it yet, so I'll do that in a second. So setup starts with a lowercase s. Then create canvas has a big C in the middle. And this is called, let's put a little note here. So we're just going to kind of introduce these ideas one by one. So this is called Camel Case. And the reason it's called Camel Case is because it looks like a camel. It has a hump in the middle. So Camel Case is start with lowercase. New words are uppercase. So if I had a function called like draw a circle, it would look like that. And the reason we do this is because it makes it easier to read. If I had a function that was like draw, let's say I had a function called like draw my paintbrush. Okay, so it's like 4 words. If I just wrote that whole thing out, so I'm not allowed to do this, draw my paintbrush. That won't work because when I'm writing code, anytime there's a space in the code, that's interpreted by the compiler to mean that something new is coming. So I have like a function, then I have a space, and then I have the name of the function. So my function name can't have a space in it because that'll get an error. If I try to run this, it's going to say unexpected identifier. Because once we start the name of the function, it's expecting these parentheses at the end of the function. And we'll talk about that more, what the parentheses are later. So I can't have a space here. I need to have just a full function name. So if I take all the spaces out of this function name, it's going to look like this. And that's pretty hard to read, right? Like if you just see this on its own, that doesn't really make any sense. And so different languages deal with this in different ways. JavaScript uses Camel Case, so it's draw my paintbrush, which is kind of a weird function name. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's just an example. Some languages, like Python, would do this. They would say draw underscore my underscore paint underscore brush. Okay, so that'll actually work in JavaScript if you prefer the way that looks. This isn't a functionality issue. This is a aesthetic issue. It makes it easier to read the code. So that's why create canvas has the capital C. Now the place where you might get tripped up is that you can't make create canvas be anything else because it's part of the P5 library. So a lot of the functions, pretty much all the functions we're going to use are already defined by P5. So if we want to look for create canvas, we can see it's right here. So we have to use it that way, otherwise it's not going to work. But if we make our own functions, we can call them whatever we want. But for now, we're not going to make our own functions for at least a couple more classes. Okay, so that was a little tangent on Camel Case. I'm just going to leave this here. And let's play the sketch, and now you can see the ellipse follows the mouse. Okay, so the position of the ellipse is always just mapping to where the mouse is. So let's do a couple things just to show what's happening when we do this with a sketch. First, one thing I can do is change this to no cursor. So if I use this no cursor function, I'm going to put it in setup so it just happens once because I don't need to do it more than once. And this is also another good example of Camel Case. Okay, now it's just a circle, right? Now I don't even have the mouse. So I can hide the cursor that the user is used to seeing to make it look like they're just directly controlling the circle. So let's look at another thing. So I'm going to take this background and I'm going to take it out. So I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to put a comment here. This is another thing that comments are often used for. This is called commenting out some code. So you don't delete the code because you might want to bring it back later. But if I put a comment in front of it, then it won't run. So now if I do this, look what happens. There's no background. Oh, it's too dark to see on here. So let's draw the background once actually in setup so that we can see what's going on. Okay, so now if I remove the background, look what happens. I can see all of those circles. Okay, so this shows us how P5 works. It's actually covering up all of these past circles. So just like when we make an animation, we're not actually moving things the way that we move them in real life. We're just drawing things in different places, and we're doing it fast enough that it looks like motion. So if I bring the background back, now I'm covering up those circles that used to be there. I only see the most recent circle that was painted. And because we're repainting the canvas 60 frames per second, it looks like a moving circle. So we can actually change the frame rate as well. I'm going to go to setup to do this and just change it once. So I'm going to use the function frame rate, and look what happens if I set the frame rate to like 10. You can see the circle isn't really moving smoothly anymore because it's not painting as often. What if I change the frame rate to like 2? Now there's these big gaps between where the circle is. And if I take the background out and run it again with that frame rate, now we see all of those little circles as I'm moving the mouse around. But normally the frame rate is like 60. Okay, so there's our circles, and we can draw on the canvas. So we can start to create a drawing program. Okay, so now we're gonna update how we draw a little bit. Any questions before we do that? Okay. So if we go back to our reference and look at events, we also have this thing called pmousex and pmousey. And that's pretty useful because that'll tell us where the mouse was one frame previously. And so we can use that to draw a line. So let's look at it first. I'm just going to draw one ellipse at mouse x, mouse y. And then I'm going to do a fill. I'll change the color to blue. And I'll do another ellipse at p mouse x, p mouse y. And you might be thinking, wait a second, this isn't Camel Case, because it should be p mouse x. And you'd be right, but sometimes people don't follow the same conventions. Like here, you can see Win mouse x has a capital M, but for whatever reason, p mouse x doesn't. So you could complain to the P5 creator and say, why'd you do it this way? But that's how it is. So let's draw another ellipse, and let's draw it a little bit smaller so we can see both. We may need to make them a little bit bigger. Let's do 20 and 10. Oh, and let me turn the background back on. Okay. Now you can see our little blue circle. Depending on how fast I move the mouse, the little blue circle is just a little bit behind. It's always a little bit behind where the big circle is. So we can use that to actually create a simple drawing. So instead of drawing circles, what I can do instead, I'm going to comment these guys out. So they're still there. And so now I'm going to draw a line between mouse x, mouse y, and p mouse x, p mouse y. So this is going to draw a line from the position of the mouse to the last position of the mouse, the last frame. And so now you can see there's just a little tiny line. Let's increase the stroke weight so we can see it better. Okay, but if we take out our background again, and what I'm doing when I do that actually is I'm hitting Command and then the / or question mark key. That will automatically either add or remove a comment. So it's a little bit faster than going to the beginning of the line and doing that. So it's a pretty common thing to do in code, so they have a shortcut for it. Okay, so now I have a little drawing program that's pretty cool.
Mine did something weird. It kept the first ellipsis just way bigger, and it's kind of moving with. It's moving with.
Oh yeah, so you just put all that into the ellipse. So the p mouse x and p mouse y is now the width and height of the ellipse rather than the position.
Oh.
So change ellipse to line.
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
One second, what is the difference between mouse and P mouse?
Mouse is the current mouse position, and p mouse is the previous mouse position.
Oh, that would be right.
Yeah. So when I'm moving the mouse around, it's like the computer is refreshing, 60 frames per second. And so it's the difference between where my mouse is right now versus where it was one frame previously. Okay. And so depending on how fast the mouse is moving.
Well, why do we need that? Like, why do we need to have that in a sense?
For this drawing or just in general?
Like for this drawing or in general?
Yeah, so it makes the drawing easier because we know, like, I'm drawing a line between the two mouse positions. So here, let me slow down the frame rate a bit so it'll be a little more. So you can see if I move fast, that difference is a lot bigger. And if I move slow, it's a lot smaller. And so it's useful for a lot of things. Like if I move inside of a button and then I move outside, I might want to know the difference. But specifically for here, it's good for drawing because we can draw between those two frames. And we could use some code to like save the position of the mouse and update it. but this is basically doing that for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so let's take the background out again. So now we can draw. You can see if I have the frame rate lower, I can still draw, but it's this more kind of like jagged line quality. So you might like that. That might be cool for your drawing style. But I'm going to turn the frame rate back up to 60. Okay, so now we're drawing. So that looks pretty cool. But we're drawing all the time. No matter what I'm doing with the mouse, I'm always drawing. So we can introduce a new type of event. And this event is its own function. So you can see down here, some of the events have no parentheses. It's just a name. And those types of events are just data. So it's just the position of the mouse which changes. Some events have these little parentheses afterwards. That means there's a function. That means that they react to a specific event in time. So what we're going to do is there's a few different ones. We could use mouse moved, but what I'm going to use is mouse dragged. And the reason I'm going to use that is because a mouse drag event occurs only when I'm clicking and moving the mouse. So it's perfect for drawing. So I'm going to go back to P5, and I'm going to add this new function. So if it has parentheses afterwards, it's its own function. So I have to use the function keyword and write the name of the function, and then put my code inside of this new function. So I'll put this, it doesn't actually matter what order you put it in. It could go before or after the draw function. I'm going to go here, because at some point we can actually get rid of the draw function, but for now I'm going to say mouse moved or mouse dragged. And all I'm going to do is put this code that I had here into my mouse dragged. And I'll get rid of this ellipse. Okay, so now it's only going to draw. Oh, then I have to delete it from here. So now it's only going to draw if I'm clicking. So if I'm not clicking, nothing happens. When I am clicking, I get to do a little drawing. Okay, so we're getting closer to what an actual drawing program looks like. I can't see my mouse though, so let's actually bring back our little cursor, but it's a little too big. And it's covering up.
All you did was copy and paste what's in function draw?
Yeah, I just moved this part into this mouse dragged.
So every time we click, we drag, right?
Yeah. And actually, we can't bring back our cursor without making things a little bit more complicated. So let's just turn the no cursor off so we can see our mouse again. And now we don't even really need this draw function because we're not drawing anything in here. So we can get rid of that. And we can still draw. Okay, so one last thing, and then I'll let you guys work on these on your own.
How did you copy and paste it into?
Oh, so what I did, I'll undo and go back. Okay, so here's my function draw down here. So I just wrote the new function mouse pressed. You could actually just change draw to mouse pressed because we're not actually really changing anything else.
I thought it was mouse dragged.
Oh yeah, you're right, mouse dragged. Mouse pressed is just if you click. Okay, so create the function mouse dragged, and then I just copied the code that I want, which is the fill black. So I'm just using the mouse and selecting the code that I want down through the line. And then I'm just hitting Command C to copy. And then I go back up here, Command V to paste. And then I don't need this line anymore, so I'm just going to take that out. And now it should work. Although now I need to delete this part so that it's not doing that. So I can just delete the whole draw function actually. So I'm just going to select that and hit delete. And now I can draw. And now I want my cursor back, so I'm going to comment out the cursor. And if it looks goofy, remember you can always go to Edit and go to Tidy Code, and it will make sure everything looks right. Okay, so we're going to add one more part to this. So once we do a nice little drawing, we might want to start over. Actually, we're going to add two more parts to this. Or no, well, let's just add, we'll see. Okay, we'll just go one at a time. Okay, so if I want to clear the background and start a new drawing, I can use a different event for that. And so let's use our keyboard. So under our events, we have a bunch of different keyboard events. And key pressed will go if we hit a key. Doesn't really matter what key it is, any key. So let's use key is pressed to clear our background. So what we can do, just add a new function, key pressed. Just make sure it matches the P5 reference. And a function has curly brackets afterwards. And all we're going to do is draw our background again. That's going to cover up the drawing that we have so far. So I'm going to draw a new background. I'm still using this default gray color, but you could change the color. Like we could make the color black or white. I guess if it's black, then we'd have to change the stroke. But anyway, so now I can make a little drawing. And then if I hit enter, we cover over the drawing with the background. So now I can do some drawing and then clear it out. So I also wanted to add a save function, but I'm realizing we're running out of events to use since we already have the mouse and the keyboard. Oh, we could use double clicked. I never really used that, but let's give that a try. So let's say I want to save my drawing. P5 has a built-in save function, so I can say function double clicked. And then there's a special function for save. And then we can save which type of, we can give a string value for the file name. So let's just call this drawing.jpg. And so now let's see, if I draw and I hit space and then let's say I have a drawing that I like, I can double click and it saves. It does also add some text here, so that's not ideal, but we're gonna learn how to fix that soon. Let's see if my drawing, yeah, my drawing does have that little dot on it. So I could switch, I could use the keyboard. Let's switch these actually. So if I key press, let's save a drawing. And if I double click, let's draw the background, because that way it's gonna cover up my dot anyway. So it doesn't really matter which event you use, but this makes a little more sense. So now if I double click, it covers it up. And if I hit a key, then it saves my drawing.
Can you specify which key you want it to press in order to save?
You can. What?
Put it in the parentheses. You just put it in the parentheses. It's like you put the key press and then there's the parentheses and then there's the bracket. You put the key press, throw the key inside the parentheses.
In these parentheses?
Yeah.
Does that really work?
Yeah, that's what I did.
So if I put like space here,
No. That's nice.
no, it still works if I hit other keys.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. We're gonna go over that next week. If you guys can, I'll give you guys a challenge. See if you can figure it out on your own. It's not that hard, but I will go over it next week. I don't want to like go over too much at one time. But what I want you guys to do now is just take this basic sketch and then change the drawing. Okay, so right now I'm just drawing a pretty boring black line. So you can change the color, you can change the stroke weight, but you can also change the shape. Like you don't have to use a line here. Experiment with other stuff. Like what does it look like if I use a rectangle instead? So if I use a rectangle at mouse X, mouse Y, and like 10 by 10, now that kind of changes the way the drawing looks, right? Or I could use multiple rectangles. Or I could use a rectangle and a circle. Just play around with basically the different shapes and the different colors that you can use here to make different types of drawings.
And when you're putting drawing, it must be an apostrophe and not quotation mark, correct?
Sorry?
Like you know how we do for fill with color, we have to put
Oh.
quotation marks, but for apostrophe when we're doing drawing.
No, actually it doesn't matter. JavaScript treats single quotation marks and double quotation marks the same.
Oh.
So if I change this to a double quotation mark, I should probably use a double quotation mark here just to be more consistent. But if I change this to a double quotation mark, it'll still work. Although now it's not working. What happened? Oh, I think I spammed my browser. Yeah, okay, continue. Oh wait, let's see. Allow, okay. So yeah, if you download too many files, Chrome is gonna start to think that you're doing something weird. So if that breaks, just click on this little download thing and say continue allowing automatic downloads. Click done. Okay, now it works again. Okay. So yeah, just play around with how the drawing actually looks. And then what we'll do next week is we will add in changing, you know, which key does what, and giving the user the chance to change colors and do different stuff. All right, I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna post the code for this on the Discord. So remember, you can duplicate a sketch. So if you go to this link and you just want to start from here, if you want to write it on your own, that's great. But if you want to just start from here, just open my project and go to duplicate, and you'll get your own version. And so you can add your own changes to it. And let's see. Yeah, that's it for now. I'll post this video in a second.